So, it's Pokemon. Okay, so there is an actual review. Welcome to the review of Tales of Tanorio, a game that is basically just Pokemon. But hey, if something like Pal World is allowed to exist, then I think this game gets a pass. It may have pretty shamelessly copied every single mechanic that it has in its game from Pokemon, but everything else is original, so fair enough. Tales of Tanorio is one of those games that I've been asked to play a few times since its release around mid-February, I believe, and I just haven't gotten around to it because, well, I'm not a consumer of Pokemon clones on Roblox. I just don't really care about them very much. But today I had nothing better to do, so I figured I'd log on and check it out, and...
Tales of Tanorio, let's go! Let's go! Challenge everything I know! Let's go! I will battle till the ending of the show! 1, 2, 3, go!
Holy mother of cringe, please help. I had the worst first impression in the history of first impressions. It sounds like a cringy parody song, and that's ironic because it's made by someone who makes cringy parody songs. So of course it sounds like a cringy parody song, and you have to hear it every time you open the game. Man, I wish there was a toggle for that. Anyways, don't judge a book by its cover, because despite the fact that Tales of Tanorio starts off in the most cringy way available, the game itself is actually good, and that's the reason that there's a real review going up on this channel. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to reviews on the channel. A lot of people think that videos that I make when I play for like an hour and talk about first impressions are reviews. They're not. The only time that it's an actual game review is when I put parentheses and call it a game review, and it actually has some structure to it. And to my shock, I played this game for over 6 hours, and it's getting an actual game review, because it's good. What? So anyways, let's jump into it, starting off with the gameplay. The gameplay is obviously not rocket science. It's literally any turn-based game that you've ever played in your entire life. And if you've played Pokemon at any point, you've played this game. That little bit I said in the intro, that still holds true. Now that being said, the gameplay of Pokemon has held up for years and years and years and years, and this game is really no different. Not only that, but as someone who hasn't played a Pokemon game in a long time, there's some things in here that I actually think are done either better than Pokemon, or Pokemon has started doing them and it's made those games better and these people have taken them. I honestly couldn't tell you because I don't play any of the recent games. Anyways, the most notable thing here is the fact that when you have either a type advantage or a type disadvantage, the game lets you know on the attack menu whether or not a move is going to be effective, super effective, or not very effective, which is a really nice quality of life feature to have. The whole idea of having to memorize every single typing matchup for every single different thing that you're going to come across in the game is frankly obnoxious, and it's just not very much fun, nor is it very intuitive to have to memorize all that stuff. And it's not like it completely takes out the advantage that you'll have if you do have that stuff memorized, considering the fact that you're only gonna know if you have the attack menu up. So if you've got everything memorized, then you always know what to switch to and what to switch off of depending on what you're fighting against. But if you don't know, then you get a little helping hand here, which will tell you whether or not your attacks will be effective or not. Now, what determines how and when you fight things is once again completely identical to Pokemon. When it comes to fighting wild Tenorians, that's just walking through tall grass, or if you're in a cave. And of course, there are scattered trainers across the paths that you'll be taking, and when you cross their sight lines, they'll engage you in a battle. Something that's really, really nice about these trainers, though, is the fact that if you talk to them again after you've fought them the first time, you can repeat the battle for the same amount of rewards as the first time. This is again one of those things that I don't think Pokemon is doing. Maybe they are now, but they weren't when I was playing. And it's really, really nice to be able to fight against a team composition that you know that you can win against to get some extra XP, or just farm up some money for some items without having to do some other nonsense. That being said, I did have a slightly minor gripe when it came to the trainers. I usually go through and fight everything just so that way I can get as much XP as possible, but I did notice relatively quickly throughout my playthrough that it was pretty rare that you ever had an opportunity to avoid trainers. In Pokemon, sometimes they'll turn different directions so you can walk past them, or there'll be certain paths to go around them, but for the most part, Tanorio doesn't have that. So you have to fight against pretty much everything that you come across. One of the other things that's really nice in terms of quality of life is the fact that you can switch out your moves with any of the moves that your Tanorian has learned at any point during your journey. I always found it obnoxious that in Pokemon you had to get rid of a move to get a new one, and then trying to get that move back was always a huge pain in the ass. But here, when you learn a new move, it just goes into a little bank of moves. So you have your 4 moves at any given time, and then after you're done battling, you can go into your menu and swap them out at any time. It's just a really nice feature to have. I also noticed that the exploration in the game when it came to gameplay was basically non-existent. Which is funny because I talked to an NPC, which there's no way in hell I'm gonna find this in the footage, so apologies in advance, but I found an NPC who was asking about if I'd found any items that people had dropped and said people are dropping items all the time. And despite that, I never once found an item on the ground that I could pick up. I don't know if this is because I was on public servers and people had always gotten all the items before me, but not a single time in the entire playthrough did I find an item on the floor. Which is a shame because it would make more sense that you could go to different sections of the area you're in to get items that would be helping you out, but instead, all you really do is just hold forward. There's never a reason to explore. One other thing I noticed, which is just sort of a departure from Pokemon, but in a bad way, was that after you defeat someone else's Tanorian, you can't switch yours until the turn starts, which then ends your turn. If I remember correctly, and I might just be dead wrong, you can correct me in the comments, but after you defeat someone's Pokemon, you get the opportunity to switch in one of your own without losing your turn. This is really nice if you had something on low health and you want to get it out of there and sub something in. But now you don't get that chance. You have to give up your turn, which in turn makes you take a hit, and that sucks. In terms of bugs and issues, I only ran into a few of them. One of them was pretty major, and that's just that I had several complete soft locks of the game, which was not very much fun. There's nothing better than having to restart the game, hear the annoying theme song again, and then realize that I had been set back significantly from where I'd gotten soft locked. The big problem is that it usually has to do with entering and exiting doors, and the game doesn't save until you're entering or exiting the door, so if it breaks on your way in or out, that's a problem. Another bug pertained to that whole move swapping thing that I mentioned earlier. For whatever reason, the tooltips don't update when you swap out a move, so it still reads as if it's the previous move, and that means that every time you swap out a move, if you don't directly know what it does, you need to quit out of that menu, then go back into that menu, then hover over it, decide if you want it, and then maybe swap it out for something else. It's just annoying, and I wish it got fixed. But overall, the gameplay is genuinely good, and I mean, I got nothing else to say on it. The story is just kind of sort of there, despite being the main focus, I think, of the game. I don't want to talk about it too much because, well, it's not done. As it stands right now, there are 2 gyms, or I can't even remember what the hell they were called. Stadiums? Yeah, stadiums. There are 2 stadiums in the game that you can clear, which are effectively gym battles from Pokemon. Which is not very many. I assume there's going to be a fair few more, and that means that the story itself is far from complete. The big note on the story, though, and the thing that I absolutely have to talk about, even though I really kind of don't want to because I'm going to feel bad about this, is the voice acting. A large portion of this game is voice acted. And to say that the voice cast varies in quality is probably the understatement of the century. Voice acting is hard. It is a difficult craft to master. And so I totally understand that when you're just kind of grasping at straws for voice actors and you'll basically take anyone you can get, voice acting is not always going to be the greatest. But at that point, you have to question whether or not having voice acting in the game at all to begin with is worthwhile. Because there are plenty of old RPGs and even new RPGs that don't do voice acting and it works just fine. That being said, I don't think there are really any of the voice cast's performances that directly take away from the game, but I also don't know if it was necessary to begin with, because sometimes you'll hear something and you'll just be like, that sounded odd, and it will take you out of it. And I mean, sometimes it seems like there'll just be blatant errors or things where, generally speaking, you'd probably think to yourself if you were recording this, maybe I ought to try that take again, but it just gets put into the video anyway. See, I just did it right there. Wasn't that weird? That's what it feels like sometimes while playing the game. Another big problem with the voice acting is the overall audio balancing. To put it bluntly, it is horrendous. Some people do fine and their voice is consistently above the music and audible. But because the voice actors are all from different places of the world presumably and all using different microphones, and the quality on top of the receive volume of all of those microphones is different, sometimes you'll have NPCs that you just can't hear despite the fact that they're talking.
I'm the one who got served. I thought you would be a good opponent. You definitely live up to what you've been saying. Proud to award you the Sprach Medal.
The other pretty major gripe that I had with the voice acting is because I assume the developers wanted all of the voice actors to be able to complete all of their lines before the dialogue completed, or maybe didn't have a system in order to cut the dialogue off. When you're reading through or going through a cutscene, you cannot skip the dialogue at any point. You have to wait for them to finish. And sometimes it's more than you have to wait for them to finish. Sometimes you have to wait for them to finish and then take a second, which adds an awkward pause, and it's just weird. It's like night and day going from the mostly voice acted scenes to the rarely unvoice acted scenes where I can blow through the dialogue while also reading it pretty quickly because I can read the dialogue quicker than the actors can read their lines, which is fine, but I just wish I had the option of cutting off the voice actors after I've already read the dialogue that's been put on my screen. Overall, some of the voice actors put in some pretty good performances, especially your mom from the start of the game, who really sells it, but for the most part, I don't think it adds nor takes away from the game. Tales of Tanorio absolutely kills it in the environments department. Seriously, whoever was the designer and the builder for all of these environments, I have no words for how well done this is. I really, really don't. It's like a massive palate cleanser from the absolute dog shit that was Arcane Lineage's environments. That game just has a bunch of open fields with absolutely nothing in them and nothing interesting to look at. It just sucks. And this game is the complete opposite. There's such a large variety of different environments too. Whether you're on a farm, in a large city, or on a snowy mountaintop, there's just so much interesting stuff to look at. Hands down, the most impressed I was during the whole game was this museum section. The museum is legitimately a museum. It tells you lore about different parts of the game on top of being exceedingly detailed. In a lesser game, you would walk past some of these cabinets and they'd either have just a bunch of flavor text that they had an AI write or no text at all. But here, you can completely read all of the blurbs for all of the different things in the museum, and that's mind-blowing to me. Someone had to have the attention to detail to go through and painstakingly write out lore and other stuff for every single thing in here. It was also pretty cool of the developers to showcase off a bunch of really talented artists who had their art and were credited in the front of the museum. Overall, the environments were one of the best parts of the entire game. I was thoroughly impressed throughout the whole thing, and just seriously shout outs to the builders and anyone else who was involved with creating this. The sounds and music is a bit of a double-edged sword, and so I probably should have split the categories, but I didn't, so here we go. Starting off with the sounds, because this is mostly a negative point. To say that this game's sound effects are lacking is once again another massive understatement. There were so many times in this game where it felt like there should have been sound cues, or there should have been sound effects playing, or even sometimes that there should have been music, and it was just completely absent. An easy example was when this boulder fell out of the sky and blocked my way. Total and complete silence. How did that get past anything? Did nobody look at this and was like, wow, that was awkward. Maybe we should put something here. Another one that really stood out to me was when one of your Tanorians was evolving. It's just so awkward. There's no sound effect for it happening. There's no sound effect for it completing, like no joyous music or noise or anything. It just kind of sort of happens. And I haven't touched on music yet, but it feels like the music for this section was maybe reused from somewhere else because it just doesn't fit. Now that being said, we were talking about sounds, but we also have to talk about the music. And the music feels like it is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Tales of Tanorio's music is phenomenal, which is absolutely hilarious to me because the music was composed by the same guy who made the incredibly cringy intro. Talk about a mixed bag. But seriously, every single music track across the whole game feels like it fits perfectly and totally nails the sort of happy-go-lucky Pokemon aesthetic of the game. I'm just gonna play you some tracks here. Hopefully the guy who made it doesn't see this video, get mad at me, and strike the video down, even though I'm telling him that most of his stuff is good. But regardless, take a listen. The only real sort of minor gripe that I had with the music was there's no victory theme. How did that happen? Like, come on guys, you had one job. When you win, it plays the happy music, but not quite here. Oh well, is what it is. The animations and visual effects in this game are lacking. I rightfully don't totally blame the game for not having a whole bunch of really impressive visual effects and animations, mostly stemming from the fact that the game has a ridiculous amount of things that you can catch in the game. So if they had to commission custom animations for every single attack that each of these variations of different Tanorians can have, that would be way too much work. That being said, I do think they sort of dropped the ball with some of this. Attack animations almost all look pretty much identical, and the thing is that you don't necessarily have to make the actual physical Tanorian do an animation in order to have an animation tied to your attack. I mean, Pokemon does it all the time. If you have a move that has rocks fall from the sky, the attack can have the default placeholder attack animation for the Tanorian, but then have a rock falling animation on the enemy character. But instead, pretty much every single animation, it feels like, is just the same one. The animations that are in the game, though, are all very well done, and I'm sure it took a long time for the developers to put together so many different idle animations for so many different creatures. There's a lot of them in here, and it's clear a lot of work was put in. So, we've made it to the end, the final score. To be perfectly honest, for a game that I never intended on playing, and certainly never intended on reviewing, Tales of Tanorio really kinda sorta hits it out of the park. That being said, I don't want to be too generous just because I expected this to be horrible. So, in my opinion, Tales of Tanorio ends up at a extremely solid 8 out of 10. I think this is one of those games where as it gets further along and they develop more areas of the game, along with ironing out some of the kinks that the game clearly has, especially when it comes to sound design and some bugs, it really has the potential of becoming a truly, truly great game. The question is whether or not it'll get there. But even in the current state it's in, if you love Pokemon and play Roblox, this is pretty much a must play. And if you're not a huge fan of Pokemon, but you're on Roblox and you've never given the genre a shot, this is a pretty decent place to start. With all that said though, we're wrapping up today's video. Have you played Tales of Tanorio? Do you think it's any good? Let me know in the comments below. I'm done though, so have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you next time.